Hello and welcome to Business Insider with Mario Toneguzzi on YYC Business, brought to you by MegaPixx Media. Joining me today is Will Dunning, who is a housing market analyst and economist in Canada. Thanks for joining us, Will.
Glad to be here, Mario.
Well, today, Royal LePage Canada put out a report on the housing market, looking at the issue of renting or buying. You were part of that report or did the report. What I found interesting, Will, was that the conclusion that homeowners paid $769 less per month than renters in the second quarter. Can you explain a little bit about that? And was that number a surprise to you?
Well, first of all, that's for somebody who bought in that period, okay? So for different periods, there are different numbers.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised it's large because I've seen this in the past. I've been doing this kind of analysis for many years. I've done it every 2 or 3 years for a decade now. This is consistent with what I've seen previously. Um, I was expecting it to be a big number because interest rates have fallen so far that the carrying cost of buying a home in recent times has been very attractive, actually, just in terms of the interest cost and then the other ancillary costs of owning a home. So 769 a month, that's based on a typical single-family home for the most part.
Mhm.
It varies depending on the type of house and varies depending on the location. Some areas are much more advantageous than others. But the study covers many cities across 6 different provinces of Canada, and in 91% of the cases that I analyzed across those 6 provinces, it's more affordable to own than to rent in this analysis.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm curious about the major centers. When we're talking about, especially like the Vancouvers and the Torontos of this country, where we know that housing prices are kind of astronomical in some ways. Does that still
Yeah.
apply there as well?
It does. It does. The least affordable cases are the ones that are at the highest end of the market. So, the super luxury executive housing, very high priced. There isn't a proportionate bump in the rents that they can attain, so they tend to be less advantageous than an entry level property. Entry level properties, moderate prices in these times, moderate rents in these times. But the equation for those entry level homes very often works out to be advantageous for ownership rather than renting.
Hmm. When you look at certain key demographics that I kind of traditionally have been renters, whether that's millennials or a younger age group, coming out of the university or even in university, and obviously newcomers to the country. What does this, research tell them now? That housing is affordable for them, or something that they should look at?
Well, it's telling them a number of things. Uh, I think one of the bottom line messages is over a very long period of time, you're going to be better off paying the cost of ownership rather than paying rent. But it's also reminding us how difficult it is to get yourself into a position to be able to make that purchase. The amount of down payment you require has increased by a lot of money because house prices have increased by so much. The other major factor that people will consider and they have to consider, I know they consider it, buying a home is a very complicated, difficult process that requires a lot of work. So
Mhm.
one of the things people look at first and foremost is what's the total payment for the mortgage and for everything else. Now, the total payment for the mortgage includes 2 parts, includes the interest part and the principal part. So you pay maybe 1/3 of the payment is interest and 2/3 of the payment is principal. That's a lot of principal you're paying for each month. It's a form of savings, but somehow you have to find that money in your pocket to do those savings, to switch it from one part of your balance sheet
Yeah.
to another part of your balance sheet, which is your mortgage equity. So you're paying in total more to own than to rent. But so much of that payment is the savings that if you look at it on a balance sheet basis, you're still better off, but you have to manage your balance sheet.
Yeah, yeah, and exactly. Can you talk a little bit about the investment aspect of home ownership?
Yeah, well,
And
that's a debate that we often have in this country. One option that some people are pursuing is to continue to rent, save the money that you would have paid for ownership, and invest that money and get you can get if you're a good investor, you can get a very attractive rate of return on that. So part of the study, the fourth section of the analysis in the study is doing a calculation of what's the rate of return on your down payment and the additional cash flows of ownership versus renting, and then assume you sell the house in 10 years, you pay realty costs and other costs associated with selling. Taking all of those flows and the value of the house and the capital gains and the equity repayment into account, what's the rate of return? Well, depends on your assumptions, right? Uh, One of the most important assumptions is how much our house price is going to increase. If you assume that 10 years from now, house prices will be the same as they are today, no growth in house prices, it actually works out as an investment in a lot of scenarios. Half of scenarios are still earning a positive rate of return, even if the value of the house doesn't rise.
Mhm.
So for me, a surprising takeaway, I think, is that you don't need to make any aggressive assumptions about what's going to happen to house prices to justify a house purchase. If you can make moderate assumptions about everything across the board in the purchase decision, in all likelihood, you're going to still be better off to own than to rent.
Okay. Anything else that you found interesting from the research you did in this area?
Well, I guess it's a geographic distribution. It's more challenging to get into the market in the highest price centers, but they also have higher rents. So it's still advantageous to own rather than to rent, even in the highest priced communities. Again, there are some exceptions to that. There are exceptions everywhere. In Vancouver, the highest price housing options uh, are difficult to justify in terms of the kind of analysis I did. Okay,
Mhm.
but in Vancouver or Toronto, the lower cost entry level options still make sense on an ownership basis. As the numbers came out of the study.
Yeah, and I guess the key again, you're going back to what you were saying. The interest rates are a huge key right now, right? In terms of the home ownership and
Yeah.
people wanting to get in.
Well, that's a very good point. So, the third section of the report is projections. What happens if somebody bought in the second quarter of this year? What would happen over the next 10 years under reasonable assumptions? One of those assumptions, there's going to be a mortgage renewal in 5 years. So, assuming that the interest rate increases, and if it increases to the highest level we've seen over the past 5 years, even with that increase in interest rate on renewal, you'll still be better off to own than to rent because rents are going to continue to go up. Your incomes are going to continue to go up. All the costs and incomes are going to be going up. Uh, the increase in interest rates gets washed out because of the growth in incomes and rents.
Hmm. Yeah, and
So you're still
obviously,
better off.
yeah, and
Yeah.
obviously the employment factor is huge in all this, right? If people are employed and confident that they're going to be employed for a while, then
Yeah.
home ownership
Well,
is awesome.
that's an excellent point. I don't want to sound like I'm saying everybody should own a home. I'm not saying that at all.
Yeah,
Home ownership is not for everybody. If you're mentioning, in an unstable employment situation, I'm not sure I want to make a commitment if I'm in that situation to a 30-year mortgage or 25-year mortgage. And if you're expecting to move frequently because you might be changing cities or for other reasons, you just expect to change residences, it doesn't make sense to buy if you're going to be moving every year or two. Okay.
yeah, no,
So some people are for personal reasons going to be better off as renters and owners. If you're in the right kind of situation, over the long term, ownership is, it's definitely worth analysis.
yeah.
And the analysis that you come to may reach similar conclusions to what I reached.
Well,
And
that's
I hope you do that analysis. Part of what I'm doing here is providing examples of the kinds of analysis people could do in making their own decisions. As an economist, this is what I think people should do. Uh, Lots of people who are considering buying have, they got very good educational preparations for doing the same kind of analysis that I've done here. If you can operate a spreadsheet, you can do what I've done in this study.
there you go, right? And well, and it's an interesting point because I don't know if many people do that, right? And I don't know if many people take the time to take a look at things over a long term and factor in everything.
No, no, but a lot do. I've been involved with survey data that asks people what factors do you consider and how strongly do you
Yeah,
consider them. And a lot of people, to some degree, are making calculations. I don't know if they're making the perfect theoretic calculations,
yeah,
but they're certainly not entering into home ownership blindly on a whim. It's a very important decision to make, and most people take that decision. Not just most, a vast majority of people take
mm,
that decision making process very seriously and do the best they can to come to the answer that's best in their circumstances.
yeah, exactly. Well, thanks a lot, Will, for joining us today.
Nice to talk to you, Mario. Take care.
All right, that was Will Dunning, who is a housing market analyst and economist in Canada. This has been Business Insider with Mario Toneguzzi on YYC Business, brought to you by MegaPixx Media. Thanks for joining us.